So, good afternoon. My name is Nivedita and I'm from WaterAid. I welcome you all to this webinar organized on the occasion of the International Women's Day. This webinar was conceptualized to discuss the importance of investing in women to accelerate progress. We all know that women constitute 50% of the total population. Hence, we understand the importance of investing in their well being. However, various reasons are there for this not becoming a reality. It is important to point out that the experiences so far have been that when large scale concerted efforts are made by societies and government, focusing on the concerns of women, good results have been achieved, not just for one generation, but for across multiple generations. Some outstanding examples of such efforts in India include decline in the maternal mortality rate, decline in the total fertility rate from 2.2 to 2.0. Then literacy rate has increased. We've also seen a rise in women who've started their own startups and even women unicorns. There's an increase. There's an 18%, 17% increase in the women unicorns. These achievements show focus tilt on women-led development, which falls perfectly in alignment with today's theme. However, there are areas where more focus is required. And today, from our experts who have been into this journey of social transformation for so many for decades, we would want to kind of understand what this journey was across different domains and what we envisage to attain, what we envisage in the future to attain sustainable development. We have a galaxy of speakers here. One is an accomplished academic, another a leading intellectual from the northeastern part of India. We have two pioneers here. One of them brought women's inclusion into natural resource management domain 3 decades back, and another who was a part of the incredible women self-help groups. Our last speaker is a passionate leader and a curious learner. He terms himself so. And he's shaped large programs on various themes, including rural livelihoods, healthcare, WASH, energy, sports, and skill development. In the interest of time, I will be constrained to give a very brief introduction of our speakers, following which we will have 2 rounds of question and answers to our speakers. And thereafter, we will open the platform for sharing the comments and questions. May I request you all to please keep sharing your comments and questions in the chat box. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions from our speakers based on their enriching experience that they'll be sharing through the discussions today. I will request my colleague Amita to keep tracking the shares in the chat box and share it at the end. Our first speaker for the day is Dr. Amita Bhire, a MA in social work with specialization in urban and rural community development and a doctorate from Mumbai University. Dr. Bhire is a professor and former dean at the School of Habitat Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. She also holds the position of Jal Jeevan Mission Chair Professor at TIS. She is a former faculty in the School of Social Work in the Department of Urban and Rural Community Development, where she has been deeply involved on issues related to urban poor, community organizations, and housing rights. Our second speaker for the day is Padma Shri Patricia Mukhib. She is the editor of the Shillong Times, the second largest English daily published in the northeastern region. She is the former member of National Security Advisory Board and also has served as member of the National Foundation for Communal Harmony under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Ms. Mukhim has been a great activist for decades, and she believes that journalism and activism are inseparable. She has authored many articles and books, including Waiting for an Equal World, Gender Relations in India's Northeast. Winner of several prestigious awards for journalism, including the Chameli Devi Jain Award for Outstanding Women Media Person. She was conferred with the 4th highest civilian award, the Padma Shri, by the Government of India in 2000. Dr. Marcela D'Souza. She is our third speaker for the day. Marcela is the director of Water Center for Resilience Studies, WCRES, and former executive director of Watershed Organization Trust, WATER. She is the executive director. Marcela initiated work on climate change adaptation in semi-arid regions, which today follows the ecosystem-based adaptation approach to sustainable development. This includes community-driven sustainable land and ecosystem management, water stewardship, climate resilient agriculture with locale specific crop weather advisories, and green livelihoods. To upscale this, methodologies to assess vulnerability, enhance resilience, and build adaptive capacities are developed. Shri Damodran Narendranath, Narendra as we call him in the sector, is our next speaker for the day, an integrator at Pradhan. He joined the organization in 1989 after completing his BTech in mechanical engineering from Kerala University. He holds a postgraduate diploma in rural management from IRMA. The work done by Narendra and his colleagues in Pradhan paved way for emergence of the self-help groups in eastern India. As a field professional in Jharkhand and Rajasthan, he organized rural women in SHGs on large scale and implemented livelihood programs. Later, he was involved in a number of national and international researches and documentation efforts to build knowledge and practice. He set up the National Resource Center for Livelihood in Pradhan for influencing and informing the design of implementation of flagship development initiatives of the government, such as the NRLM and Manrega, to facilitate policy dialogues. He served as the executive director of Pradhan from 2017 until 2022. Sri Bishwanath Sinha is a social development specialist with over 28 years of diverse experience. He is working with WaterAid as Director Policy and Technical Support. Prior to joining WaterAid in 2022, he has worked on various large-scale programs. Notable amongst them during his tenure with Tara Trust was where he worked on system of rice intensification, the SRI, and diversion-based irrigation. These two programs jointly had a direct outreach of 1 million plus small and marginal farmers, wherein women-headed households were given priority. His professional experience work extends to working on women's self-help groups in the 90s with Pradhan, at a time when SHG was still a new concept. He has also been on different national level committees on agriculture and water management. He established India's largest grassroots football program and football baby league, where a large number of young girls and boys got systematic training in football and life skills. That's the kind of a rich speaker list that we have here. Decades of experience on different domain, and with them, we look forward to an enriching session of about 2 hours from now. So, to begin with the discussions, I would first want to bring on board Professor Amita Bhire. Professor Bhire, how do you relate to today's theme of invest in women, accelerating progress? Within the Indian context, how do you think the status of women in the last 77 years since independence, how has it evolved? And what have been the key achievements? And what are the areas where more focus or investment is required? So over to you, Dr. Bhire.
Yeah, it's a huge question, Nivedita, the span of which can go in multiple directions. But I think it's an important beginning point as well, right? Uh, I think we have very few stats really on what was the status of women in India at the time of independence. But there are multiple narratives, and these narratives basically indicate that the life of women was tied to multiple traditions, and in a predominantly rural agriculture based country like India, uh, the thought of innovation, mobility, um, uh, bringing in any kind of fresh breath to a life which was condemned otherwise to family and community. You know, I think that is really the status of women in when we became independent. From then, I think the next milestone was really 1974 when this report called Towards Equality was published. And the Towards Equality report was really a shocker. It was a shocker. It stirred many, many responses in multiple places in the country, basically because the picture that it pointed out, one of the most stark pictures, was linked to really a very, very low uh, sex ratio. And that sex ratio as a determinant or as a reflector of the overall value that is placed on women is something which is a extremely key marker of the towards equality report. I'll come back to a report which was then published in 2013. Uh, and with a committee which was again appointed by the government of India to look at various parameters of women's status. And I think what the committee report of 2013 says is in many ways true of contemporary India. And I'm just going to outline some of the areas of concern. Okay. So, this 2013 report points out that there has been a relative or a marginal increase in the overall sex ratio, but at the same time, the child sex ratio in the country has been on a decline. And this is something even in the period between 2001 and 2011. What is more, the decline in the child sex ratio, which was previously seen only as an urban, prosperous, technology availability kind of factor, is today become a reality even in remote, rural, and tribal districts. So today there are only 90 districts in the country, 90 districts, where there is no decline in the child sex ratio. Now, this is something definitely I think of key concern, because the child sex ratio is not just indicative of a particular parameter of women's progress, but it talks about the overall value which is given to women, their bodies, their health, how does one see a woman, etc. The second part, I think, is perhaps linked to the economy. And on the economic front, I would perhaps also talk about even, I think, in 2011 census tells us that the overall workforce participation rate of women in India was around 25%. What is perhaps even more concerning was that the workforce participation rate of women in urban areas was around 15.5%, a full 10 points lower than the rural workforce participation rate. Some of the latest reports of the Indian economy, the PLFS report to be precise, indicates to us that there has been some increase in the workforce participation rate of women, both in the rural areas as well as in the urban areas. Yeah. On the other hand, if one looks at other parameters of what does this participation in work entail, then those are not very positive ones. For example, there are only 4% women who are involved in organized sector jobs, and more than 48% women are actually in self employment. And what self employment means, what own account work means, is perhaps known to a lot of us. Uh, there are several interesting, I think, other things which are also happening. The drudgery which is associated with the woman's life. Uh, if one looks at several qualitative studies done in different parts of the country, then that drudgery, whether it is linked to collecting firewood or collecting water, there are schemes to offset some of these drudgery linked aspects, but at the same time, these are only these are interventions which have not touched a woman's life fully. Uh, and which means that a lot of women's life still revolves around walking long to collect water, walking long to collect firewood, and so on and so forth. There are so many elements to that tragedy. But there are also very interesting positive things which are happening. And I will just mention two and perhaps then stop there. One is that there are 21 states in India today uh, where there is 50% reservation for women in the local bodies. And I think we began with the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments, giving women around one third representation at 33%. But I think the extension to 50% is something which is a very interesting move, and political participation of women, which seems to be a new and emergent area through which women's empowerment can also be achieved. The second, I think, very interesting fact is also again the Economic Survey of India, a very recent one, indicates that there are over 12 million self help groups in India. And of these, more than 88% are women membership only groups. And these have cumulative deposits of about 47,000 crore with an overall growth rate, a CAGR of 10.8%. Okay. Now, how does one make sense of all of these, in some ways very positive to perhaps some very depressing kind of signals that one is getting? And I would say perhaps my sense is that he the pathways towards women's empowerment. I think there is no doubt that women are advancing ahead, but that the pathways are both unpredictable, unexpected sometimes, and at the same time, they are full of challenges because they are bringing in every path, every two steps forward also brings in one step, which kind of is not a back step, but perhaps it becomes a side step. And that's my sense of the situation.
Thank you, Professor Bhide. Yes, very, very pertinent points you've mentioned here. You've kind of, we've mentioned about, you've taken us from a journey in a very succinct kind of a manner, wherein you've mentioned about the child sex ratio and why it is important. You've also shared about the employment when you're talking about the PLFS study. There is a 37% increase. That's what the figures show, at least, and the reasons quoted for that being the high literacy rate and the TFR that I was talking to you about, and also about about it being more tokenistic rather than it being like actually on ground kind of a thing. Also, you've alerted us there as well, and you've ended on a very very pertinent note saying that pathways are unpredictable, unexpected, and full of challenges. Yes, I completely agree with that. And from here on, I would move on to Patricia ji. Patricia ji, you are a journalist, and it's believed that empowerment journalism has the power to reshape narrative, elevate marginalized voices, and inspire change. So, as a prominent figure of journalism and activism, how do you perceive equity from the perspective of women in your work area or in the larger social context? Could you share some insights from your experiences and your observations as to what exactly have you witnessed? So, over to you.
I think I'd like to respond to what Professor Bide said just now, because it appears to me when I listen to her that she's speaking of an India which we are not part of. The India's northeast is always a forgotten territory. Uh, Most of the things that she said doesn't seem to apply to this region, because she spoke of the lower TFR now. I'm sorry to say, but in Meghalaya has the highest TFR ratio. And in a state of just 33, 34 lakh people, the birth rate every year is about 1 lakh babies. And we also have the lowest condom use. So it's these are the dichotomies of being in a large and diverse country like India, where development does not really reach the people. And my concern has always been to move to the rural areas, because that's where the stories are. Basically, journalism is just trying to track stories that matter to the lives of people, especially the least empowered, which is rural women, and giving voice to them, giving them agency, giving them a platform. Because you might think that women should be building solidarity groups, but they are so caught up in their little workspace. They spend most of their lives in the field. And then, of course, in the rural area, in the urban areas, you have domestic workers working for very low wages. So they don't have the time or the opportunity to build solidarity groups. And that's where I think journalists come in, because these people have an angst and they want to say their piece, but who will say it for them? And I think it's our duty as journalists, especially as women journalists, to become that enabling factor. And we really have to seek out stories and traverse the rural areas. That in journalism you find that women journalists are usually given space for so-called soft stories. And soft stories means what? Fashion, music, and all that, the arts. But I think women should be trained now to do the hard stories that question government. And there has to be space for that in journalism. Unfortunately, we have too few women editors who can give that kind of space to reporters. We've seen how the media had degenerated over the years, or maybe over the decades, and how so much of media is being co opted by the powers that be. So we have actually very little space for these stories now. And personally, I think it's so important to get out of our comfort zones and have that passion to bring about more responsive governance through our stories. Uh, I think media that forgets the lowly and the voiceless becomes a co opted media of the elite, of the affluent. And I don't think this is what the media is supposed to be in a democracy. Now, if doing so is equated to activism, then so be it. If the media is not the advocate for the least empowered in society, then what is its role really? And there are allegations that an activist tries to influence the debate, whereas a journalist helps to create an informed debate. I think this is just trying to find fault with activism and linking it to journalism. A lot would depend on what the journalist has taken up as the theme for the story. If a village has not been getting water and women have to travel miles to get that one pot of water, what does the journalist do? The journalist has to follow that water trail, has to ask the women questions, or even the men who are carrying water from such a distance, what their views are, what do they want government to do for them. Because they say that journalism you cannot make up stories. No, we cannot make up stories, we write facts. We help to tell the stories of other people which are based on facts. We do a lot of back and forth, question and answer kind of journalism. Now, if we look at the Ujwala scheme of this present government, the other day I went to a village which is just about 50 kilometers from the city of Shillong, but takes about 2 hours to traverse because of the poor road conditions. So I asked a few women in the village whether they were using the cylinders, gas cylinders, the LPG stoves, and many of them said, we got the first stove because it was given free, perhaps with very little payment, but now we can go to a place 37 kilometers away, which takes about 1.5 hours in a vehicle to get our LPG replaced. So, if we do not take up the cause of such families, and if we don't do advocacy here, then what is journalism for? And then we have facts on the ground, and we have spoken to the gas agency people too, who say that because there are too few subscribers, they can't be coming for those few people. So we are sensitizing the block development officers and other government officials to wake up to this reality. See, the problem with rural villagers is that most times they're too scared to enter a government office, much less to tell their unfortunate stories. So isn't that then the shouldn't that gap be filled up by journalists, by the media? Uh, Professor B, they spoke about 50% reservation for women in the panchayats, in the local bodies. It's rather unfortunate that in the northeastern states, Mizoram, Meghalaya, and Nagaland have been exempted from the PRI. And the reason given is that these three states already have very robust, functioning traditional institutions. Now, the story is that these institutions do not allow women to hold office. Women don't come to these institutions. So, where do they get their political training? In Meghalaya, people are fighting, women are fighting for this. They're fighting to get a place in the traditional institutions. They're fighting so that they can contest to be holding office, but it's a long journey ahead. In Nagaland and Mizoram, women are not even talking about it. So that is the huge disparity between the Northeast and the rest of India. Now, of course, in journalism, we need to assemble facts, we need to verify facts, we need to be fair and accurate, but it is also our duty to hold governments accountable, to hold all those in power accountable. And if that amounts to advocacy, then so be it. Because in today's very complex media scenario, every person with a smartphone has become a sort of journalist. Every person is telling stories, and some of these are from areas where journalists don't reach. So, in a sense, that also is advocacy in a way. And now, when a journalist blows the whistle on corruption through well researched stories, isn't that person also an activist? So the line between activism and journalism is almost blurred. Besides, as an editor, I also take a stand on issues through my columns. I'm not sure if that breaches journalistic protocols, but it also means that I have a life beyond journalism. So I'll stop here for now. Maybe you can come in later.
Thank you, Patricia. Yes, very important points you've mentioned about getting hard stories on board and kind of, redefining or kind of working on a role of the media to create a voice for the voiceless, especially about the kind of challenges that they're facing, practical challenges, on ground challenges, which unfortunately are at a backstage at the moment, and that's exactly what we need to kind of, and also the stark realities in terms of the diverse implementation of different kind of schemes and kind of programs. So I think that's a work area that surely needs to be introspected. Now I come to Marcella. Marcella, we are happy to have you here. And you have been a pioneer in bringing gender element and natural resource management. I mean, back, you were the first one I mean, you were one of the people in the 90s who thought about bringing in that element of gender into the natural resource management. Development is reckoned as an engine of agricultural growth and development. It it began with a focus on management of resources in medium and large river valleys, and gradually focus expanded to a more integrated approach involving communities. How do you see this role evolve in this journey? And like, if you may want to also touch upon some of the points that were mentioned by Patricia in terms of water, and and what were the challenges women faced and how they overcame those. If you could possibly share some of your thoughts on those. So over to you, Marcella. Thank you. Marcella, you are on mute. If you could unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies. Thank you for having me here. Uh, when you asked me the question of what was the journey, I felt as if I was going back into, well, it was the end of another century. And I remember the time when I joined Water in 1995, and that was the time with the Indo-German Watershed Development Program, a major bilateral program, and that was the time they were considering including women into the program. And I remember I went around. I asked Father Herman Bach. I said, "What am I supposed to do?" Because so he just gave me a one sentence statement. He said, "The problem is the program." I knew I had a blank sheet. I knew how to identify the program. And the problems, and let me share. In 1995, 96, when I was talking to the NGOs, mind you, there were only men around. It was a total, being a technical program, it had only men in NABARD, it had only men in water at that time, and men in the NGOs. And I was the only woman. So when I spoke to the NGOs at that time, I said, we need to get a woman's staff. And the first question they asked me, and if they get raped, what would be your responsibility? spoke to when I spoke to NABARD, my first report is how many women. I had one woman and two women now taken up by NGOs. So it was a today when we look back, it was a very, very strange time. I know later on with NABARD, I said, let's have a certain fund in the program so that we can use the fund to encourage women to participate, to look at works that can reduce their drudgery in terms of making water more accessible, in terms of addressing the fuel wood systems, etc., things that could reduce. And then we wanted a 5% of the budget. And some of the NABARD staff asked me, why only for women? Why not for men? So, slowly this became a challenge. And I realized one thing. I needed to go and understand what was the problem, and according to that, design the program. There's one thing I have to state. Right from the beginning, within Water and from NABARD, I had full support, but nobody could help me as to what to do. So that was my first opportunity. I went around understanding the problem that women were facing. When I went to villages, I realized that at that time, the women within themselves did not even know the names of one another. So you can imagine if they did not know the names, they were not even communicating with anybody else except almost within their family, their immediate family and relatives. So you can imagine the loneliness that women felt at that time. They were very excited that they could now come together and talk as we started getting them along. Then when I went to the villages in those days, I could only go with my male colleagues because there were only men in the program. They would be behind the doors inside their house, and I literally had to go to every house, and when they saw me, a woman, they would come out. We would bring them together in village meetings. And at that time, the women would come, a few women would come, have courage and come, because they said they didn't want me to be alone. They couldn't understand how I was alone with all the men. And gradually within my colleagues, we would strategize. The men would ask the women questions and I would ask the men questions in these meetings as a way of demonstrating what can happen. And I think slowly these little experiences became effective. Gradually we had more and more men coming in. And the only time, and when we had to go to meet the women, when I had to go to meet the women, they would meet only after their work was done. That would be meeting them at 10 o'clock in the night, and then our meetings would go on till 12 or 1. In some villages, they had the Bishi system, and they would collect money, distribute it immediately, and in that group, the women would be collecting the money, but they had 1 or 2 men who would be keeping the account. And the women said it's only at night after 10 o'clock that they were available. So I would go from village to village at night because they were available, walk with them during the day in the field. But it gave me an opportunity to actually understand what was the problem. And gradually we shifted from them keeping the accounts. That was a whole process, But what I did during that time was to understand where were women and women within the watershed development and natural resources, how were they associated? And I came up with a strategy and paper, Women in Watershed Development and Gender Mainstreaming, way back in 97, 98. And we had our first training that we could share with others that we need to include women in the watershed development. And we had, being as a part of the Indo-German Watershed Development Program, it gave us an opportunity to learn and practice together. Around 2002-03, I was put a challenge again by Father Barker and the others, and they said, why can't women take up a watershed project? And mind you, talking about the technical aspects. And then that was the challenge. So we had a small little fund, a special project, where we decided to test out 160 hectares being treated exclusively by women. And this was by women doing all the technical work. Initially, the women said, the technical work is very difficult, but the social mobilization will be easy. Within that period of a few months, the women were able to grasp the technical work, did the records, accounts, and measurements accurately. I'm talking about 2002 3. The biggest challenge we had in that little project was not from the women, it was the social perspective. We had obstacles coming in from the NGOs, we had obstacles coming in from men. And they said, how can you give a project to women to do? We were challenged at every count. And when my technical team went to assess, the measurements and everything were perfect. There was nothing. It was only the whole issue of the men being able to accept women. And that was the time I realized that if we have to have women participating actively, we cannot have an exclusive women program. It had to be a gender, we had to mainstream the whole gender perspective. Just now, I'm going to only talk about male and female. I'm not talking about the third gender. So over here, we decided, and right from the beginning, women and men have to be part of the development process, that men are equally victims of societal biases. So we took the perspective of women participating together with men in everything. We had the women's self-help groups and the Sayuk Mahila Samiti, which capacitated the women, which helped the women discuss their problems, but everything else went to the Gram Sabha and was discussed together with men at Gram Sabhas. When we had the women, then we had, the program earlier had 2 or 3 women in the village watershed committee. You can imagine the situation of 2 or 3 women in front of men. And here they had to talk in front of the husbands, the fathers-in-law, the sons, and 2 or 3 women in a group of about 7 to 13 men. They were silent. But around 2002-3, we made a change. We assessed the issues within water and we realized we had to have a village development committee and we had to have a proportionately representative households of all castes and communities proportionately represented. And then 50% would be women and 50% would be men. Till today in water, we follow this method. So these were some of the things that happened. But around the year 2004, one of my colleagues, she said, there's something strange about this village, about a village. We have one girl child and 15 boy children between the age of 0 to 5. This gave us a bit of a shock. We had not realized the sex ratio was so poor and so bad at that time. So we decided to take up the issue. We managed to get a project about 4 to 5 years later to support this. And it was not in the watershed project. We had to keep it separate. It required a different attention and focus. And in the first 3 months, my team was just rejected by about 24 to 25 villages. They said, please don't touch the topic. We changed the strategy. We started having non-religious but deeply meditative processes that started in the village. It was deep meditation, but without any religious connotation. So everybody could participate, women and men. Believe it or not, in 3 months, we had a change. We had another 22 villages. We had a training where these 22 villages sent a total of 54 women for a 3 days training outside the village. It was not heard of in our experience. That made a whole change. And incidentally, just to share, the sex ratio in all these villages have improved. And we assess the sex ratio at the age of 5 when we also assess it together with the nutritional status of the children. And that was when we began the whole process of motivating and mobilizing women and men together in the whole process. So since then, we don't turn away from having women and men in the process, you know. And we are convinced that we have to follow this way to take it forward. I think I can stop here.
Fantastic. You've walked us through a very fantastic journey where you, two points that I could possibly get was that, one was the strategies that that you used were so community driven, like in terms of kind of when you mentioned about this meditative process, so that you got a buy-in from there. And the other was something about joint processes in order to ensure gender mainstreaming. Yes, that's a very important point, because otherwise that power structures get so challenged that unfortunately it becomes a little it becomes a barrier in
Yeah.
attaining gender equity and equality. That's a very important point. So at that, coming to our next speaker for the day, who's always been into women empowerment, being a man himself, Narendra. Narendra, you've been involved in the evolution of SSG movement, right? With which now forms the backbone of a lot of the government programs like the NRLM and the SRLM, impacting thousands of women. These have, as our former speakers were also mentioning, that there are 12 million SHGs, out of which 88% happen to be women-led. So, can you let us know the key milestones and the challenges in this evolution, how it has impacted the grassroots development efforts? How the women perspective came into picture and how it has now taken shape to become a backbone. Like now you've got SHGs that are, like, for example, in Karnataka they're managing plastics, in Tamil Nadu they're handling the amma kitchen, amma canteen, in Uttarakhand you're having some drone operated kind of medical supplies that have been given, and the seva model. So how has it evolved, and how is this women centricity come into picture? So over to you, Narendra.
Wow, again a very, very large ask. But thank you, Nivedita. Thank you, WaterAid, for having me in this conversation. And before I start, I would like to offer my tributes and my salutations to all the women who have been part of my life, part of my jobs, my profession, part of my organization, all the women in all our lives, and also the women that who we work with, who have done wonderful initiatives and have helped us create many of these very interesting programs and create successes. And we know that each success that we've had has been built on the struggles of some of those women who have actually, they have put their lives online. They have faced persecution, they faced ridicule from their community members, they have challenged patriarchal structures. So every time a woman has dared to come out to speak or to even adopt a new way of life, a new behavior in birth control or anything, they have faced persecutions, and lot of those stories don't come out. What we hear are the success stories of those women and the results of their struggles. But I think there's a lot these women have gone through in creating these successes, and I think we all owe a lot of gratitude to them. So my salutation to them as well. And coming back to the topic, I think you asked me to focus on this whole National Rural Livelihoods Mission and how has that evolved, and then how has it been able to build on the various success stories that and it's primarily based on civil society movements. So how has it been able to adopt and adapt to itself the successes that the civil society has been able to present. So in fact, if you look at the current, the way in which NRLM operates, which reaches about 10 crore women, I think every at least all the rural poor women in this country have one or the other self-help group to be part of. And as a person who has been involved with promoting self-help groups in a very early stages, it's hugely gratifying to see that we never at least imagined at the time when we started back in the late 80s that we are promoting self-help groups, and at some point of time, every woman in this country will have be part of a self-help group. So um, this evolution of SHGs is one story, and the another way NRLM picked up is another story. But NRLM itself is a result of many initiatives that the government has been, I think, trying from time to time. At least in my memory, I can remember back up to the Integrated Rural Development Program, the IRDP, and there were programs even before that. I think the community development programs, etc., which have actually evolved and morphed itself into now the form of the NRLM today. So the IRDP, if you look at it, was individual-based, loan cum subsidy program, and there was particularly no focus on men or women in that. It was to a set of BPL families, and mostly the men used to be the beneficiaries in those programs. So the individual beneficiaries, they called it, they were the men. The women, yes, were there, organized separately into something called Dwakra groups, but they were more or less, at least in the places where I saw, pretty dysfunctional, because nobody had idea of how to form groups and how to organize group enterprises and so on and so forth. Surely there are success stories everywhere because there are enterprising people everywhere, but more or less, I think, and all of us know that IRDP, it did not go well at all. It was actually in spite of a very robust design, etc., it did not really work well. The system took over. There was a lot of corruption. There was a lot of repayment problems. Every rural BPL household, I think, became a defaulter to in some of the other bank. So it was a big problem when the IRDP kind of was about 10 years into its this thing. And then by that time, I think the self-help group movement also had started picking up in the country, and people understood the power of these groups. We had seen that in Bangladesh happening. Even the indigenous movements like the Bishis, etc., which Marcella mentioned. So there was many of these indigenous group-based micro uh, you know financing that was happening. So I think putting it all together, that the self-help groups, which some NGOs like Myrada, Pradhan, etc., started experimenting with in mid-80s, kind of found success. So, but unfortunately, for some time, and the SHG movement, I think, worked very well. There were the self-help groups, they were linked to banks. The whole NABARD SHG bank linkage program was happening very well. A lot of credit was moving into these villages. So they were actually trying to kind of managed to solve the rural problem of rural credit, even though not to an extent, or at least they found a pathway. But that is when the government stepped in and declared the SGSY, which was a huge setback, I would say, to the self-help group movement. The way they created the Swarna Jayanti Gramin Swarojgar Yojana, they tried to adopt the self-help group model into it, but also did not adopt it properly because they had a hangover of the old IRDP with them. So both these together actually did not really augur well, and group promotion and nurturing, etc., by the line staff department through the block level extension staff, I think just did not work. They were not equipped to do that. And again, it had the same problem, massive repayment problems, and women in multiple groups, they are defaulters everywhere. So earlier there were men who were defaulters, now the women also started becoming defaulters. So it actually really did not work well. And I think that it was that at that point of time, the late I mean, mid 2000s, that we started discussing about an alternate way of doing things. And by that time, the self-help group movements also had, independently, there were many programs, like in Andhra Pradesh, they had the Velugu program, or the Kudumbashri in Kerala. So there were many mainstream, large-scale self-help group-based programs that had shown success. And I think that is what got scaled up into the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. So in the NRLM, as we see today, it has had in its, taken a lot of lessons of the various programs that have happened before that, what succeeded, what did not succeed. And they tried to build on the positive aspects of the self-help groups. They retained the character of the self-help groups, unlike in the SGSY. So the SHGs have a particular character. They are a set of affinity groups, women of similar challenges. They, socioeconomically homogeneous, as we say, not necessarily homogeneous, but similar. Women form these small groups. So there is a affinity group which we also see as a primary group for every woman, where she herself represent herself. It's not a secondary representation, but she represents herself. So there's a primary group that every woman has access to, and where it's not just about microcredit, but she's also a part of a neighborhood group when they're able to share their pains and their successes and the sorrows. So it's kind of a peer group of women, which is a very strong support group for them. And so that spirit is very important in a self-help group. That is because that is a space where the women get to share with each other their the ideas, and they help each other, they support each other. That they've retained in the NRLM, and I think that is in a very important component for the success, because that is the building block which then builds on to the rest of the whole edifice of the village organizations, the federations, and then the uh, large scale district and state level collectives. So it has been able to build on that part, the women's affinity groups. It also has done away with the subsidy part of it, and it's purely a microfinance program. It has its downsides as well, but it's also kind of kept focus on the SHG process. Then I would say it has been also more important. I think the biggest realization in the NRLM, the way NRLM groups and the way this SGSY groups is, here there is a recognition of women's leadership. Earlier, the women are just what do you call, recipients of credit or a channel for credit, etc. But here, I think at least in the conceptualization, how it pans out in practice is slightly different. But at least in the conceptualization, the SHGs or the NRLM recognizes the leadership of women and the need to put women in the leadership role, and helping and facilitating them actually deciding the development agenda and then driving that agenda themselves. So that gives a lot of onus to women to be creative and express their creativity and their leadership. So that gives more voice, and you can see the result of that happening as well. A lot of these positive results that um, you know we just heard about the reduction in the mortality rates or the participation in the labor force, etc. I think it's got a strong link to, in fact, some studies have also happened recently, the strong links to the collectivization and the solidarity of women that have happened under the NRLM or the self-help groups as it were. I think, and the last and most important is also the realization in the NRLM that you need a special dedicated structure to facilitate and nurture the group and provide them an ongoing support, which is what originally the NGOs were doing, the civil society was doing. And there was a recognition that you need a civil society kind of a space, which is more flexible, is not so top driven, not bureaucratic like in the line departments, and they created the NRLM. So NRLM actually is it's actually a civil society NGO, but formed, but it's got a mixed character. But it's actually formed in the NGO sector, and almost all their staff actually being recruited from market, and unfortunately, lots of us NGOs here have supplied people to the NRLM. But nevertheless, so it does actually exist in the civil society space, and it's a dedicated structure which the groups require. The group require facilitation, the group require nurturing, the group require constant support and challenging in order to keep innovating and doing newer things. So this structure is very important. And so this 3 or 4 features actually I think make NRLM pretty strong today. And obviously there have been very liberal resourcing of the whole program, unfortunately, and unlike many other earlier programs, I think there's a intent on the side of the state in order to support these groups, because the groups have really shown, I mean, the potential the groups have shown or the response the groups have made to even little investments have been enormous. So therefore, the way the women have been able to respond to developmental signals through to credit or to various other training inputs and capacity building, etc., have been enormous. So I think that has created a lot of hope. Today, therefore, the NRLM stands as a strong foundation for building any other movement about it. So today you can see the NRLM also doesn't remain purely a microcredit program, even though it is for a long time it was, and it still has a very strong microfinance program character. But they're trying to layer other activities, of livelihoods, enterprises, even gender, social inclusion. So there are many newer ideas they're trying to and the many experiments that even the new ideas that Nivedita said, the drones and etc. But they all still remain very experimental or pilot basis, etc., etc. There's a lot of much more work to do. The role of NRLM itself needs to continuously evolve as the challenges are growing, the economic realities, the market realities are changing. NRLM continues to need to rediscover itself to face up to the new challenges that are happening. But at least it is proved that if you put the onus of development in the hands of women, they are far more effective in taking it forward than what we had seen in the earlier case. When we had the men as the beneficiaries. So I'll stop here right now, and then maybe Niveta, wait for your next set of questions.
Thank you, Narendra. I completely agree with you on that, and very encouraging note that you've mentioned there. And the important point that you mentioned about was that NRLM recognizes women leadership. The second is a need for a dedicated structure so that they could take that shape, and in fact, resources matched with intent. That's the most crucial part. That usually it isn't tokenistic, but there is action in the intent. So that's where that matters the most, I believe. And in fact, I was reading somewhere that in fact now the SHGs have been such that the return rate from, I mean, commercial banks are waiving off their loans, but the return rate is 100% for women SHGs. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of credibility that it has
Actually, there's no
created.
more a question now that the repayment rates are the highest. There's no more a question anymore. I mean, that
Yeah.
bridge has been crossed long back.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what. So that's what brings in the credibility part, and that's as you were very rightly mentioned. So yes, now we come to, we touched upon this in the previous parts as well in bits and pieces, like when we spoke about NRM, we spoke about infrastructure, basic needs. So my next question is that to Biswanath ji. Biswanath ji, the past years have witnessed a lot of focus and investment on government by the government in fields like water and sanitation, something that affects the women the most. So through powerful missions like the Jal Jeevan mission and the Swachh Bharat mission, there have been investments there. Please share your thoughts on the achievements under WASH from the gender lens. What are your perspectives, considering there is this crucial linkage between WASH, as I mentioned to you, and that it's about uh, what role has women, what is the role that women play right now, and how it has evolved. So over to you, Vishwanath ji.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nivedita, for having me in this particular program. Very difficult question to answer, but let me try to take from where other speakers have left, and also try to link the discussion with similar kind of initiatives which have been taken in the field of economic development in form of women self-help groups, or in the field of natural resources management, which also results in more economic return to the villagers. So whether we call it integrated natural resources management, or community forestry program, or joint forest management program, or watershed management programs, in my limited understanding, the role of the civil society organizations in the field of drinking water supply, sanitation, and hygiene has been there for long. But I think the kind of evolution which other sectors have seen, the wash sector has seen it in completely different way. Why I'm saying it is completely different way is that there were attempts about creating successful models, and very often we talk. I heard about, and I also visited about many civil society organizations working about 20 years back, 25 years back, with a clear vision about what they used to call a 360-degree solution to the issue of drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. So by 360-degree solution, it meant that each and every component of the wash aspect will be taken care of, and 100% coverage will be ensured either at the habitation level or at the village level. So essentially meaning that if you have 100 households in a village, and if you cover in your sanitation program only 60, and if 40 are left, it is as good as living entire population of the village, because people will go for authentication and it will affect the other rest of the population who are having um, access to protected sanitation. From that kind of an approach, and I also remember in during 2006, 7 and 8 and 9, there were reports which actually kind of had shaken the entire country, particularly for those who were involved in the development process and development dialogue, where we have seen that in terms of rural sanitation coverage, India's coverage was almost like one third of rural Bangladesh. So thereby, um, the need to invest in waste sector was felt very highly. But I would say that most of the civil society engagements, by and large, in large scale, were still in the fields of education, healthcare, and rural livelihood. So I remember in February 2008, when I was in Tata Trust, Sardar Tata Trust, to be very specific, we had gone up with our 5-year strategic planning exercise, and the summary of the exercise was presented to the board. And the chairman, Mr. Tata, had remarked that everything is fine, but I read reports that so many households in rural area are left behind in terms of coverage in basic things like sanitation, and why your strategic planning document does not reflect at all about it, because we were predominantly going by that time the conventional interventions in the fields of rural livelihoods, healthcare, education, etc. From that situation to today's situation, where government of India has invested huge amount of money, 48 billion USD for drinking water supply system itself, around 55, 60 billion on sanitation, is a huge jump. And I think it needed what we used to, you know, talk about 360-degree solution and 100% coverage that has been actually envisioned in the government program. And that is a big game changer, according to me. So 100% coverage of, institutions in the form of Anganwadi centers, schools, public health centers, and particularly in Jal Jeevan Mission, I would say, when the government came up with this design, wherein they said that we will provide, FHTP, functional household tap connection, I think that was a big game changer, because earlier in drinking water supply system, we used to think that 3, 4 households or 10 households will get one access point, and they will go to one common place, which is, and there was also some discussions about what should be the minimum distance to be covered, whether it should be 70 meters, 60 meters. So that debate was not, it's not a very old debate, but the government of India coming up and saying that we will provide functional household tap connection. And remember the fact that in 2019, which is not very long back, when government said that we'll provide it, they actually targeted more than 16 crore households. So in that way, I would imagine that this is a massive, massive program. And of course, in the on the other side, because it is a mission-driven program, and obviously some of the priorities have been to achieve targets. Probably, certain finer points were missing out. Now, I am coming to your specific question about how I look into this from gender perspective. Because of all these, game-changing proposition, and also because of some effective implementation of the program, we have seen that in terms of WAS coverage, particularly in institutions, it has witnessed a huge jump. So if we go by Unified District Information System for Education Plus, which is known as UDICE Plus, in 2020, ending 2022, in the government schools, 79.4% of the schools had girls toilets, and whereas the boys toilet is 2% lesser than the girls. So in a sense, the importance given to the girls in school is very much evidence from this kind of data. However, within that, I think there are some finer points. If we now look into the information available from the ASER report, which is Annual Status of Education Report, again 2022. So I'm actually taking data point from the same year. So we see that about 11% of the schools, the gap, the 11% of the schools where the girls' toilets were, provided with toilet facilities, the toilets are not functional. So, um, so there is some kind of challenges, challenges here in terms of infrastructure creation. Probably we have done extremely well, but in terms of maintenance of the infrastructure, probably we could have done much better. Now, the second point I would like to highlight is that overall, if we see, in the waste sector, if just consider the drinking water sector job creation. So, uh, recent WHO report says that it is not Indian context, but Indian context will be by and large the same. At the global context, only about 20% of the jobs created in water sector has been for the women, and rest of the job creation 80% has been for men. So there is a huge disparity here again. Um, the other aspect is that if we see the menstrual health hygiene component, which is extremely important, and which also comes under WAS. And very often this is a neglected area when it comes to policy formulation, because unfortunately this particular subject is actually cross-cutting kind of. The nodal ministry in India is the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, but it also comes under different other ministries. So there again, in terms of achievement between 2016 to 2021, as per the National Family Health Survey, the uh, number of women using hygienic methods for protection during their menstrual period has increased dramatically from 58% to 78%. But the fact is that a national menstrual health policy is coming up only now in 2024. That too, because the Supreme Court actually directed the government of India. So this is the situation we are, because the last document was not a policy; it was a guideline, which was not very effectively implemented by the states, because health comes under state subject. So these are some of the areas where I think we can have much more impactful intervention in future. Lastly, I would say that in terms of approach, like Marcella and Naren and Professor Bide and Patricia were talking about, learning from lots of the things which we have done in last about 30, 40 years. I think because of the mission approach in both SBM, JJM, some of the finer points in terms of process, which we could have incorporated in these two large programs, could have resulted much more sustainable result. Just to give you an example, uh, there will be huge number of operational drinking water supply system, drinking water supply systems in rural areas at the end of the mission, national Jal Jeevan mission. As I mentioned, it will cover um, around 16 crore households, which will be covered in a span of about 6 to 7 years time. Now there is a massive question about once the mission, is accomplished, how those operation and their drinking water systems operation and maintenance part will be sustained. That is not very clear, and in not many places it has been successfully, implemented. So can we actually take learning from all these SDG movements, the way the 10 to 20 member of SCG members, sitting on regular basis, just talking about their daily lives, and then collecting some amount of money and starting with small savings and credit activities to the national rural livelihood mission, which is a massive jump in a span of about 20 to 25 years. And it also provided some kind of means for giving a pathway, at least if not the entire roadmap, to showcase that how the small initiatives from very grassroots level can be sustained. This is one process which I think National Jal Jeevan Mission and SPM Swachh Bharat Mission can adopt. My last point would be that despite all these massive achievements in terms of physical targets achievements, unless we address some of the critical issues, particularly about the women, a nation probably we will not be able to move forward in a very rapid pace. So, just to give a simple example about what is the role of women in the schemes of drinking water supply, the the popular norm still remains that women's role will be mostly for domestic water uses, and this is a kind of socialization which we have normalized over a period of many years and decades. So unless those things are actually broken and we actually look completely in different way, the way the program itself actually looked, because it actually went for from conventional way of just doing schemes to like IRDP Madan was mentioning, to actually having very hardcore approach about achieving target. Similarly, if we don't have this kind of approach in relooking the traditional role of the women in maintenance of drinking water supply system or sanitation coverage, which we have achieved massively, uh, there will always be a question mark about sustenance and thereby overall overall development of the overall, I would say, HDI, how it will improve, will not be achieved unless we address these soft components. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishwanathji. Yes, softer components along with the hard thoughts need to be kind of adhered to and taken into account for bringing in that holistic development that's required, holistic effort that's required. Another point that you mentioned was about the broadening of horizons or broadening of perceptions rather than the stereotypical kind of roles. We need to broaden our way of and coming out of that shell. That's another issue that I see what that's a big takeaway from your end, and learning from the past programs to build on the future programs is something that we need to go. So coming to that, from the past we would like to move on to the future, and that's when I would want to talk about the futuristic approach. So coming back to you, Professor Bhede, during the interim budget 2024 presented by the government, there was a lot of focus on Nari Shakti and increased investments on Lakpati Didis. So, what are your thoughts on such like efforts and their contribution towards empowerment of women in the long run?
Okay. So I think one of the strong points of these kind of approaches, because I think if you just take the count of even names of such schemes which are emerging all over the country, it's Majhi Kanya Bhagyashri, Ladli Beti in Madhya Pradesh. Then West Bengal has Kanya Shri. Uttar Pradesh also has a Lakpati Didi. I think Mukhyamantri Lakpati Didi, or Uttarakhand, sorry, has this scheme. And this is one more scheme along the same lines, and I see it as a emergent trend which is linked to perhaps also thinking about conditional transfers, and which has emerged as a very popular strategy. One, because I think the entire element of direct benefit transfer saves a lot of the bureaucratic hurdles. That's one. The second is that key, at least in terms of intent, there is a matching of a reform intent, a social reform intent, and which is tied then to a financial incentive. Now, in the case of Lakpati Didi, this incentive of a 5 lakh interest free loan to a self help group is one which is extremely tempting. And perhaps I think Narendra should also talk about this, Narendra. But my experience, at least with even small amounts of such loans which are given to SHGs without an assessment of what is their maturity level, uh, can perhaps result in, it's not just more indebted SHGs perhaps than SHGs which are able to take that next leap towards a more secure livelihood. Okay. And I think women definitely and SHGs definitely need to undergo those processes. And a target based approach to these kind of schemes can prove a very slippery ground, which can actually perhaps create more troubles for women rather than advantages for the self-help groups. Okay? For groups that are prepared, for groups that are mature, I think a 5 lakh rupees non-interest loan promises a lot of opportunities. But I do have a lot of hesitation when it comes to thinking of this as a target based direct benefit transfer which is made to self help groups. And the gains from it might be rather, I mean, it might lead, like the Andhra Pradesh thing, into a trap where there are so many indebted SHGs. And I think the same uh, allegory, though you have not asked me about this, Nivedita, but I think in applying this to other areas of financial transfers as well, where I'm seeing this kind of a deposit which is made by the state government, which is linked sometimes to education, which is linked sometimes to the marriage of a girl when she is born. I think the intents are in place, but at the same time, for groups which are actually social groups which are very poor, these kind of things uh, may be uh, because future is not a timeline that they look for. They look for immediate returns, they look for immediate resolution of immediate concerns, and these kind of transfers will not give them that. Okay. So these are all investments keeping the future in mind, and in that sense they are a very important agenda, I think, and a transformative agenda at that. But at the same time, the present day concerns need to be also addressed through a different kind of package of interventions.
Thank you, Dr. Bide. Narendra, I would like to transgress the protocol, and would you like to come in now, or is it that you would want to come in
No, I
later?
can, I can come in now. I can come in now also.
And
Nivedita,
I
please
also
don't call
would,
me Don. Hmm? Just call
all
me Naren.
right,
Yeah, please continue.
sure. And also, I would want you to kind of, also throw some light on your envisionment on the role of the SHG movement when India aspires to become a $5 trillion economy. How do you see the role of women panning out in that? So, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I mean, since NRLM continues to be the largest women's self-help group program, so a lot of what I would say would be also about the NRLM itself, and because it's a state-sponsored, very large, one of the, in fact, the largest, uh, you know, group-based program in the world. But unfortunately, like this, when you have these two-stage discussions, I tend to see exactly the opposite of what I said in the beginning, in my second stage. So please bear with me. Uh, when we talk about a 5 trillion growth, especially when you're talking about exponential economic growth, which surely the country is expected to be, going through, I would say, how does this growth happen? So that's a much larger point I think all of us are concerned about. Is it equitable? Is it distributed? Is it the prosperity that is happening? Is it happening across the country in a similar manner, or are we seeing Northeast in a particular way and some other parts of the country shooting up very fast? Are the cities growing much, 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 much faster compared to the rural areas? Are the men moving faster than the women? So I think when we talk about fast economic growth, there's a tendency to leave behind lots of people, lots of regions, lots of areas, lots of communities. But our dream is that whenever we talk about this future growth, we want to see that as equitable. And therefore, large programs of this kind, like the NRLM, the self-help group conglomerations, have a big role to play in making this the growth path much more equitable. And that is, I think, my basic submission, that how does the NRLM now, as I said in the beginning, it's created that huge massive base of the rural women, and now you have the urban livelihoods mission, and I'm sure they will follow exactly the same template. uh, I don't know how they will do it, but I think maybe the same template that they have had a good success in the rural areas, the same self-help group model. So you have created that huge edifice, or that huge foundation of the self-help groups. Almost every household represented by the women are part of that structure, and then you have built the superstructures, the other collectives above it, and you have now many different kinds of new groups coming in, like the producer groups, the farmer producer organizations, enterprise groups, startups. So there are many other spin-offs happening from the same foundation. So same women playing different roles in many places. The women are now quite vocal. They have lots and I think millions of village women leaders have come up, especially the community resource persons who have been specially trained and equipped. So there is a massive groundswell that has been created. But then with this groundswell, what is the potential of this groundswell that has been created? Is it just, would NRLM continue to remain just a lean frame, let's say a one-dimensional microcredit program, or will it now kind of try to discover its own potential and grow much broader and diversified? And that would be my question to the mission itself, or my vision from my vision for the mission itself. What having said it, I'm saying all said and done, it is still uh, it's a program that is one of the still better functioning programs of the government today, which is a real time grassroots reach. So it's organized very poor people into groups. So that, I think, is what gives me hope about this program. And it's also the program I still continue to put my bets on the NRLM, because it has rested its hopes on the women. So that, I think, and therefore its also program is a big hope for the women. So therefore, I'll continue to bet on NRLM, but I would want the NRLM to challenge itself. So would it continue to remain just a microfinance program, or would it want to now come out of that limitations of any particular products that it wants to deliver, into becoming much more of a orchestrator of prosperity, in the sense, from a rural livelihoods mission, can it move into a rural mission, per se, a rural economy mission, where it actually talks about equity, economy, and ecology going together, and the prosperity, which is much more distributed. So can NRLM play the role of a orchestrator of an equitable and sustainable development, rather than just being a deliverer of its program? So currently, if you look at the program, when you go to the district level or down to the block level, it kind of totally looks similar to what an earlier block development office was. So the block management, there's a manager there. The block manager is now almost looks similar to a BDO. He's got many staff under him, many verticals. So there's a new every day. Somebody or the other is, especially sometime in the national level, sometimes on the state level, they're adding new program. Now there is a Lakpati Didi program. There's a social inclusion program. There is a gender program. There is a startup enterprise program. All this program now comes to, like the earlier the BDO used to suffer from multiplicity of programs which he had to handle. The block manager continues to mirror the same confusion. So do we want to create one more kind of messy bureaucracy that was there, or you want to create a more purposive community institution building program? So that, I think, the choice they have to make. And I personally would prefer that the mission should come out of its activity focus with many programs. So the microcredit, the Lakpati Didi, there is regenerative agriculture, climate resilient farming, there is, and you name it, everything is there. So do you want to have a vertical on each of that, and then you have a bureaucracy around each of that, and then at some point of time you will start looking like the government? So then you're not really reached or served the purpose that we were supposed to serve originally. So I personally think the NRLM now should start playing the role of a orchestrator of convergence. It should look at the various programs that are already there, and then try to play the role of converging resources into the rural area. It has to become a champion. It has to become a spokesperson for the rural communities. How do we drive more and more investments into the local areas? How do we create a collaborative ecosystem with the self-help groups there, the various producer groups, the market institutions, the Panchayat Raj institutions, the block government, bringing these things together and actually orchestrating convergence, because that is the biggest challenge today. Every department is well funded, but they're all existing their silos. The problem of the whole idea of convergence that we have been now talking since decades, there aren't any practical solutions to it, because every department wants to operate on its own way. Mission is something which, because they have the connect to the people. None of the other programs, they're all thematic programs, like agriculture program, or some credit program, or some other service delivery programs. But here you have one program which is actually organizing people. So using that strength of the people as a platform, how do we help converge multiple of these programs? And therefore you become a different kind of a creature, which is a catalyst in that very large ecosystem that exists there, rather than be just one of the cogs in the wheel. So I think that is the fundamental change I would like the mission to make. And this can be detailed out further, but I think we need a setup there. And we need one another specific point I have is we need much more larger participation of the civil society organizations there. The group, institution building, collaborations, ecosystem building, etc. Specifically the roles of civil society organizations. We have under the NRLM kind of marginalized the NGOs into delivering specific one or two activities, maybe innovating, etc., etc. We need to bring the NGOs also into the mainstream. So how does the mission, the civil society organizations, the panchayats all come together as a collaborative, as I was saying, platform, and then converge resources with this idea of ecological sustainability and reaching to the very poor people? That's equity. So somebody needs to keep focusing on that aspect of the growth. Otherwise, what 5 trillion can become 10 trillion, but it will go in a particular very skewed manner. The rural areas will continue to suffer. The northeast will continue to fester. So all these things will continue to be as it were, and then NRLM will become just another program. So since we are talking about NRLM as a platform of women, and this is where the women have already displayed, they have been multiple thousands and thousands of ways displayed their creativity, their ingenuity, their leadership, their political skills. But somehow we are not able to use that fully through a program of this kind in order to drive development in a particular way. We continue to reasons a lot of us know, but we need to try to come out of those limitations, and the mission needs to kind of drive forth in a particular way. Thank you.
Thanks. I think Nivedita has got her laptop discharged or something. So till she joins, and she should be joining anytime. I would like to continue the discussion where Naren actually left. I think one of the things, not only from the point of view of WAS, but from the point of view of the evolution of HSGs and for that matter, any local institution. What is important is, and I'm trying to link with the same question which Nivedita had asked Naren to you, is that looking at the overall, perspective from the national level, and preferably even from the point of view of aspiration of the people. How these local institutions, and by local institutions I am including the SHGs, or even village water and sanitation committees, panchayati raj institutions, on this particular aspect is when we particularly talk about maintenance, operation and maintenance of pipe drinking water supply system. We are really scared that after creating so much of infrastructure across the you know all corners of the country, what would be the scenario? And thereby the capacity of such institutions like the SHGs and SHG federations, and then the SHG federation also has different structure. It has block level federation, it has cluster level federation, state level federations, etc., etc. With the need of the future economy and the kind of expertise people would have to acquire, particularly to run, say, infrastructure. Because if you are running a pipe drinking water supply system in a village, even if it is a single village scheme, it will typically cover, say, 120 households or 200 households, or at the least 40, 50 households. That itself is, a kind of, it's like running a factory for the village. So how the capacity and expertise of the women leaders of such institutions can be further strengthened um, with the changing time. It's not only about economic activities to be enhanced, and thereby making each and every SHG member Lakpati Didi, which is very attractive to hear about. But I think what is more important is how do we actually build up their skill further and make them future ready. I just at this point, Nivedita, since you were not there, I just had continued with the same question which you had asked to Naren, and where Naren left from, and just added one component to the discussion. So
Thank you so much, and apologies for the inconvenience. I don't know this last minute technical glitch that really happened. Apologies for the inconvenience for that. So like when I got disconnected, Naren was talking about this inclusive, kind of uh, development in terms of getting in more meatier role for the civil society organizations and other stakeholders. So, building on that, my question to Marcella would be, this is like the government of India is focusing on building an all-round, all-pervasive, and all-inclusive society. So, what, according to you, would be the kartavya? We're talking about this kal, the 75th through the 100 years to be the kartavya kal. So, the kartavya or the duty of different stakeholders in accelerating gender inclusive progress in natural resource management and in general, to bring in this um, to accelerate progress. So, over to you, Marcella.
Okay, let me put again nature in the front. Because if we are looking at natural resources management and we are looking at the sustainability of our tomorrow, we have to look at the natural resources that are within us, that are around us, that we are a part of. You know, so I think we begin with the kartavya that considers, let me call it the natural ecosystems within which we live. Across our whole country, we have various types of natural ecosystems all around us. We live in ecosystems, and each ecosystem is unique. And here is where I look at, having the people of the local ecosystem, the natural ecosystem, take responsibility. They know their ecosystem, they have lived with it, they have a history to know how the water is managed. For example, in the Rajasthan area is very different as it comes to another in the semi-arid areas of Maharashtra, which is very distinct from what is happening in the Tamil Nadu area or uh, in the endogenetic plane. So it is the people within it that know it well, and that we need to that we all from outside need to help them take it forward. And so, talking about the ecosystems within which we live, I think here we cannot have a top-down approach for any of us, agencies working with the communities. There can be no top-down approach. We have methods in which we can engage them to elicit it from them. We working at reaching out to them as individuals, individual households for different individual activities. In this approach, it disturbs the entire natural ecosystem. While on the one hand, we have to see that the entire community benefits and is inclusive, we need to bring that communitarian spirit, although we look at benefits going into every household there. So looking at it from an equitable point of view, I think Vishwanath and Naren also spoke about it. Looking at the equity point of view, looking at the equity considering the future of our natural resources, particularly water and the landscape and the soils, you know, this can only come about if we have a communitarian approach. And here is where we look at the perspectives and roles that women and men play. I think all of us have experienced that in our families. Women are wired very differently from men. But it's only when we bring the women and men together from their different perspectives can we have a response that is more holistic. So I'll give you a small example of what we've had. When we discuss, and here is where I would say, what should be our role? Our role to the community is not just training. We need certain amounts of training, a certain amount of capacity building. But I think since they have a lot of knowledge and experience and history, embedded in the way they do, and since we have a lot of our youth today and people today, both women and men, girls and boys educated, we need to elicit their knowledge and experience in the whole process. So rather than just provide them with trainings, the capacity building approach we need to take should be more of workshops, dialogues, discussions. I think Patricia mentioned this a little bit earlier. How do we take in the dialogue and discussions that the people have so that, they own the project and they have a better knowledge of it. But taking up dialogues and discussions with the people and bringing in their perspectives is extremely important. I now realize, in the work we do now, if we do some studies, we do impact assessments, we do various kinds of research, taking this data and presenting it to the community, the women and men together, and eliciting their response and their reaction is so enlightening, is so, they come out with things because they feel the situation rather than us as outsiders making decisions for them. So when I look at the way forward and what should be our kartavya for our path towards sustainability for the future in the natural ecosystems, it is here when we have to get the women and men together. I have seen when we've taken these, we use various tools to do it. When we've taken it to the communities, you get even passionate women who come and say, if we have an area where 14 villages share an aquifer, and they have to come around aquifer management. It was a woman over here who said, and who expressed so much of passion that every time we took the model to a different village, she was there in the front to explain. And here is where we have to identify and allow these leaders to come up, women or men, bring them together, let them discuss the issue. Let me share another experience where we presented to the villages. We had about 110 villagers who had come together from about 15 villages. Now, women and men, we had the groups to separate so that they could discuss within themselves. When we presented the amount of water that was being used and wasted, and the amount of agriculture that they were getting for it, the amount of water that was lost in evaporation, we just presented the data to the people. The women said, we have to begin this, and we have to begin this in our own homes. And they said, our first action is going to be, we'll get all the women's groups together, we will explain this to them, and we will see how we can conserve our water. And the men said, this issue and this problem, we have to take it to the Gram Sabha. We have to discuss it at the Gram Sabha. So you can see, if we put the two together, we have women bringing in their areas of strength and their area of control, and the men coming together where they think they can take it together. And I think this is where this is the way in which we think we have to go forward. So we realize that taking the data to the people is extremely important. I'll give another experience of nutrition. I always wondered, when we do so much of work in agriculture and natural resources, and all of us working in agriculture are contributing to agriculture and improving agriculture productivity. It is happening. The question is this agriculture productivity reflecting in the nutritional status of the families? And when we assessed our own villages, we were shocked with the results we got. We found that hemoglobin was very low. We found that they were having plenty of foods which are mainly cereal based, and a variety of a little bit of vegetable, a little bit of something else, etc. While their income had increased tremendously. So there was no dearth in income increase, agriculture productivity. It was all going to the market, but the nutrition had reduced. So we turned it a little bit. We took the nutritional status of children, we showed it to the people. We took the hemoglobin status, put it across to the people, and said, here's where you stand. And then we took the whole model of what are the foods that they can consume to reduce the anemia, to improve the nutrition. And we put up multi-layer farms where they could get round the year products where they could consume. And this was during the COVID times. We had a control groups. So the control groups during the COVID times couldn't meet, even within the villages. After the COVID, we went and assessed the hemoglobin. We found a tremendous increase in an improvement in the hemoglobin, in the women, in the men of the villages that had the knowledge and the means to access it. The multi-layer farms, the kitchen gardens with nutrition. Whereas those households which could not get it, and it was the COVID that prevented the transfer, their hemoglobin status had not improved. So here is what we realized was, give them the knowledge and the information and let them make their decision. Let them own the project. If we want it to continue, it is ownership, knowledge-driven decisions that they can make, and particularly in the roles of women and men. And this can be sustainable in the long term. And we have found that over the years, even after we have left projects, the water is better managed. They have more water in terms and drinking water and potable water, and water is closer to the households. They manage it better, and this can be taken forward more sustainably. So we believe that following an ecosystems-based approach and bringing the communities to understand it can take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcella. At this point, I would like to bring in Patricia, because Patricia came in and indicated a very different kind of a perspective about the regional disparity, the gender disparity, and the kind of she brought to the fore getting on hard stories from the ground. So, Patricia, coming back to you as a feminist change maker, how do you see journalism as a tool for promoting gender equality? particularly in regions like Northeast. And I was just reading your comment, and wherein you were mentioning about not having, even awareness about some of the schemes that are being mentioned here in this dialogue. So how do you see this gap to kind of get reduced, kind of a thing, and where I mean, and also we want to understand from you from what at least at the perception level, because in Northeast it's perceived that there's less of the gender disparity as compared to the other places. But then I would want to understand your perspective as to how do you see it as a uh, from your side of the story. So over to you, Patricia. You're on mute, Patricia. You'll have to unmute yourself, please.
Sorry about that. No, as I said in the inbox, I feel like an outlier here because I'm not an NGO worker and I'm hearing about Lakpati Didi for the first time. So if I have heard it for the first time, you can imagine people in the outback. When will they hear about it, and what do they understand by this word? All the schemes are named in Hindi, and no one makes the effort to translate these into the regional languages and to the state languages. So we just people just don't participate. They're not active participants, I should say. And then if you talk about civil society movements, they're still very weak in this region. Now, coming to your point about this region is perceived to have less gender disparity, I think this is one of the biggest misnomers. Because this is not based on any rigorous survey. It's just an assumption. It's a romanticization of the region. Patriarchy in this region is as bad as everywhere else. The only saving grace is that we don't have dowry, at least amongst the tribals. In all other indicators, we are worse than many states in India. My own state of Meghalaya is the third most poor state in the country, and Meghalaya is supposed to be a matrilineal society where people in the rest of the country, the rest of the world believe it's a paradise for women. The reality is quite the opposite and worse. According to the NFHS Survey 5, about 42% of households in Meghalaya, matrilineal Meghalaya, are led by single women parents, most of them living below poverty line. And then 52% of the women in this state are anemic. Children are very undernourished. The HDI levels are very, very poor here. And also, see, in the rest of the country, you have the panchayats. At least women are able to tell their stories to the panchayat leaders or to narrate their grievances. Over here, who do women talk to? The traditional institutions are all male centric. And if women cannot hold office there, then where do they take their grievances to? There isn't any effective grievances redressal mechanism. And the irony is that a woman can be a politician and even become a minister, but cannot become a head woman in a village. That is the irony. And just imagine when Nagaland elected two women MLAs, there was so much of publicity in the rest of the country, as if women have scaled new heights. And this is 2023, mind you. And then for the first time, Mizoram elected three women MLAs. That too made a lot of media, I mean, got a lot of media coverage. So the point one wants to make here is that as women journalists, we cannot be circumscribed by our role as journalists only. We have to walk the extra mile, do many things apart from journalism that do not clash, of course, with the profession. But I think possibly the biggest contribution we can make is to create awareness on the umpteen government schemes that are available for people to access. If government schemes are there and people are not able to access those schemes, how does it improve our lives? I also come from a state that has the highest teenage pregnancy in the country. And you go to the rural areas, you'll find girls of 13 and 14 years already carrying one child on their backs. And then somebody who's 16, 17 years has another child. that she takes along with her. So there is a huge dropout rate from primary school, from high school, because the girls drop out from primary school or from the high school level. They have nothing else to do, and then the only thing is have sex. And when you have sex, you don't need to produce a child every time you have sex. This is what we tell these women in the villages. But then there's a lot of shyness, there's a lot of religion also that comes into the picture, which tells them you can't use contraceptives, you can't do abortion, you can. So I don't know. We are in a very conflicting kind of situation. As it is, we are a conflict prone region. We've just recovered from insurgencies in many of the states that I know. But in Manipur today, we know how conflicted that state is. And this is the seventh or eighth month since the conflict. People are still living in refugee camps. Women are in a very, very pathetic state, but nobody is talking about it. That is, this conspiracy of silence is what is really very disturbing about the country. Sometimes you wonder whether you're living in India or in the periphery. And when I say periphery, we're connected to India only by 1% of our boundary. The rest, 99%, is with other countries. So, whether we need other strategies to to get people to jump into the bandwagon of all these schemes that are articulated by the central government from time to time, because I do not believe, and I wish to do a survey on this, I don't believe that NRLM is doing as well as it's doing in other parts of the country. I think I'll stop here.
You've hit a very sensitive note there. And at this juncture, Patricia, I would like to bring in a colleague of mine, Madhavan. Madhavan, if you could please come over, because unfortunately, we would have, I mean, given the kind of speakers that we have here, we would want to go on and on and on. But what I see right now and what I realize right now is that we've got final um, 4 or 5 minutes that are left for the time to end. So I would like to bring on board Madhavan, if you could please come over, please, from this robust discussion that's really happened during the day. I would request you to kind of help us conclude with the comments, please. Over to you, Madhavan.
Thank you, Mirza. Uh, I've been sort of struck by the sort of diversity of this conversation the last couple of hours. And I think this diversity is something that Patricia has brought out very significantly about the fact that there are these assumptions about the status of women in the Northeast. And the fact that we have we still haven't yet found a way to communicate better and to understand the challenges of the Northeast and the fact that they're unique in a sense. And I think that is a tragedy that goes beyond questions of gender equity that we must find a way to address. Uh, I think Naren talked about the fact that in some sense, a lot of us and all our work is about building on the struggles of women who have preceded us, whether at community level, in all the professions we work in pretty much all sectors that we're engaged with. And I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that we have a responsibility to build on the struggles of women who preceded us, and therefore can't drop the gauntlet either. I think this one of the threads of the conversation that Marcelina, Naren, and Vishwanath alluded to was about the fact that moving forward, there's a need to look at equity, economy, and ecology, all three finding reflection in change that we wish to see in rural areas. Uh, I think the last point that I wish to make is that, in some sense, I think while there are opportunities that exist, but there are significant challenges that we must recognize if we want to sort of make a difference and to move ahead. I will just end with a very brief, with a personal anecdote when I was listening to this conversation about the National Rural Health Livelihood Mission and the potential that has been created in many parts of the country around vibrant groups of women organized initially around microcredit, but now other things. Increasingly, as part of Jal Jeevan Mission and in trying to provide pipe water supply to rural households, we're seeing women now who are part of National Rural Mission organized groups step forward to play a role in tariff collection, in operation and maintenance of pipe water systems, and also now to start to take loans for water and sanitation using funds that the National Rural Livelihood Mission makes available. So a month ago, I was in Odisha, in a district called Debagarh, and was talking to a group of women who are all part of groups created by Mission Shakti in the state of Odisha. And so there were 100, 125 women, and many of them had received functional household tap connection, were receiving pipe water supply in their household. And when I was talking to them, it transpired that even a few years ago, they spent anything between 2 to 4 hours to fetch water. And now the fact that they had water available in their household had made such a huge difference to their lives. And so I asked them that if you now have access to water at your household level, and you've saved in some sense 2.5 to 3 hours, what do you do? And there was a young woman sitting right in the front, and she said, it gives me time to sit down. And I was so struck by that, so the women burst out laughing, but I felt that it was such a telling comment. We don't even recognize the importance of of women having this space to just sit and not do anything else. And so in some sense, I think while we celebrate successes that have got us up to this point, I think we also need to remain focused about the huge amounts of inequity that exist in this country, and the fact that there are gender norms that continue to be very entrenched. I'd like to stop here. I'd like to thank Patricia, Marcela, Amita, Naren, Vishwanath, and Nivedita. Thank you very much all for your time. And I hope that we could all learn from this and find ways of taking this forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madhavan.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, and we have a couple of questions that we have, but in the interest of time, we will possibly share them with all our speakers and revert back to the participants on an individual basis. So with that, we'd like to thank you so very much, all of you. Wish you all once again a very happy International Day for the Women. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.